Washington Post for $250 million. Along with Amazon products being made in China's state-owned factories, Bezos wants to expand Amazon's business in China, saying that Amazon is well positioned to serve China. Also, Bezos' connection to the Communist Party is clear in the advertising section of the Washington Post, which includes a supplement called China Watch. China Watch is written by China Daily, the main propaganda outlet for the Communist Party. And in the past few years, they've paid American newspapers, including the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times, nearly $19 million to run the inserts. But that's not the end of it. A recent report from the Department of Justice's Foreign Agent Registration Act revealed scathing information that a group in the U.S. directly linked to the Chinese Communist Party is arranging private dinners and sponsored trips to China for media outlets and top journalists who are selected for effectiveness. The mission is to garner favorable coverage on China, and in turn, hundreds of positive articles on China have been published. Some of those media outlets include ABC, NBC, Associated Press, Reuters, Bloomberg, CNN, CNNBC, MSNBC, The New York Times, Newsweek, NPR, The Huffington Post, The Atlantic, The Financial Times, USA Today, The Economist, Time Magazine, Washington Post, The Wall Street Journal, and the list goes on and on. But what's this have to do with covering up crimes against humanity? Well, for over 20 years, human rights groups like Amnesty International and also the United Nations have reported that Chinese citizens who practice the spiritual discipline of Falun Gong are being demonized, tortured, and killed by their government. In the early 90s, Falun Gong was supported, awarded, and even endorsed by the Communist Party. It taught to live a spiritual life. Practitioners are encouraged to follow traditional values, to tell the truth, to be compassionate and tolerant, to be responsible to their families, and to be hardworking and good people in society. News reports even quoted government officials who stated that Falun Gong dramatically reduced healthcare costs nationwide. However, at that time, the Communist Party leader was Jiang Zemin. He came to power largely by supporting the 1989 Tiananmen Square student massacre. When he found that Falun Gong was not controlled by the state, he viewed its popularity and promotion of spirituality as a threat to the party's control. He stated, "How could the Marxism we endorse and the materialism and atheism we believe in not crush what Falun Gong propagates? If it were true, wouldn't we become laughingstocks? The Communist Party must eliminate Falun Gong." And on July 20th, 1999, he launched a nationwide violent crackdown. In the beginning, mainstream media reported on the mass injustices. Thousands being arrested, people sentenced to 18 years in sham trials, tens of thousands suffering in labor camps, unspeakable cases of sexual torture, psychiatric abuse, young school teachers beaten to death by police, horrific cases of men and women being burned, mutilated, and electrocuted to death. A Wall Street Journal reporter even won a Pulitzer Prize for exposing the mass torture and killings of Falun Gong practitioners, including Miss Chen, a 58-year-old grandmother who police beat to death over 3 days for simply pleading for her freedom to believe. Under orders from the regime that no measures are too excessive to wipe out Falun Gong, she was whipped and beaten with plastic pipes, punched in the face and head, electrocuted with stun guns on her neck. Her ears were swollen black from torture, and all her teeth were broken. She crawled outside her cell, vomited, and died. The reporter stated, "The effects on society of such systematic brutality is hard to gauge. None of the deaths have been reported in the Chinese media." But then, in the 2001 lead-up to the Beijing Olympic bid, reports surfaced on how Jiang Zemin was influencing mainstream media to remain silent to the crimes happening to Falun Gong in China. For example, in 2001, the New York Times publisher flew to China to meet with Jiang Zemin. Days later, NewYorkTimes.com was suddenly unblocked in China. And since then, they've been mostly quiet on the persecution and even published stories attacking Falun Gong. In March 2001, James Murdoch, son of media tycoon Rupert Murdoch, returned from China and stunned attendees at the annual Milken Institute Business Conference by viciously attacking Falun Gong with Communist Party propaganda. In the years that followed, a sample of Associated Press and AFP and Reuters articles showed 75% were spurred by Chinese government sources attacking the group. In 2007, CBC, Canada's national news network, who held the broadcast rights to the 2008 Beijing Olympics, canceled a scheduled documentary on Falun Gong after pressure from the Chinese embassy. Documentaries on Falun Gong were also quietly killed by PBS, CNN, and 60 Minutes. In 2015, a Beijing-based New York Times reporter found strong evidence backing experts and tribunal conclusions that prisoners of conscience are being slaughtered in mass numbers for their vital organs by the communist state, where Falun Gong practitioners are possibly the main victim. However, New York Times editors told her not to pursue the story. The picture is quite clear that for fear of losing billions of dollars, mainstream media is being censored by the Communist Party when it comes to their crimes against Falun Gong. Recently, some mainstream media with strong ties to the Communist Party have attacked Falun Gong with religious bigotry and hatred, hauntingly similar to Communist Party propaganda that Falun Gong is political and a danger to society. But is trying to stop the torture and killing of human beings actually considered political? I mean, if your loved ones or friends were being murdered, would you not approach your government for help? For over a quarter century, Falun Gong has been practiced right here and in over 100 countries by millions from different races, and for 20 years against all odds of violent persecution. It's been Falun Gong's peaceful and rational efforts to help save the lives of others that has garnered support from millions who've signed petitions calling for an end to the persecution, and also from government officials worldwide, including 5 unanimously passed bipartisan U.S. Congress resolutions, 10 resolutions passed by European Parliament, and thousands of officials who have issued proclamations and signed statements calling for an end to the persecution. Also, the founder of Falun Gong, Mr. Li Hongzhi, is a 5-time Nobel Peace Prize nominee. He was nominated by the European Parliament for the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought, and he's the recipient of Freedom House's International Religious Freedom Award. These actions should speak volumes about the spirit of Falun Gong's teachings. One of the most powerful weapons of every genocide campaign in history is hate propaganda, lies, and fake news that's used to create indifference towards a targeted group, allowing the atrocities to continue. And for 20 years, the Communist Party has used hate propaganda, lies, and fake news to paint Falun Gong as controversial and something to unmask, while mainstream media has perniciously followed along. But has mainstream media forgotten what the Communist Party truly is? They're responsible for the deaths of over 80 million people. They killed millions during the Cultural Revolution. They killed over 1 million Tibetans. They killed thousands in the Tiananmen Square student massacre. Today they still suppress Tibet. They persecute true Christians, and they are ethnically cleansing the Muslim Uyghurs. And they're attacking innocent Hong Kongers who are standing up for freedom. In 1997, they covered up the bird flu. In 2003, they covered up SARS that killed people worldwide. And in 2020, they covered up COVID for 6 weeks, allowing it to spread and kill millions around the world by lying that it was not transmittable. And today, they still try to hide responsibility for COVID by blaming U.S. soldiers for the virus and by jailing heroes who tried to warn us of the cover-up, like reporter Jiang Zhan, who was just sentenced to 4 years in prison as a troublemaker. This is today's CCP, and it makes you wonder how mainstream media can partner with them and how journalists can believe a thing they say about Falun Gong, or anything for that matter. We then have this guy, high-ranked Chinese embassy official Mr. Chen Yonling, who defected in Australia and exposed the real reason for the continued attack on Falun Gong. He stated, "The Chinese Communist Party has always relied on violence, lies, and advocating atheism to maintain its power. They cannot understand Falun Gong's peaceful efforts to protect their freedom of belief. Now, they can't let the international community know what they've done to Falun Gong in China." For what it's worth, if you want true information on Falun Gong, visit the Falun Gong website under this video, or human rights organizations like Freedom House. And to all mainstream media journalists, no one can deny that the Communist Party's actions against people who practice Falun Gong are so terrible and so evil, they run counter to the proper nature of human beings. To align with good is to help stop these things from happening. To align with evil is to ignore these actions and further promote the suffering of these human beings by demeaning them as something to unmask. Instead, unmask the CCP and help those who are suffering under evil forces, regardless if you understand their spiritual faith or not. Don't make the promotion of evil your contribution to this world. Make the fight for good and justice your core value, because the universe keeps score, and the ultimate cost of ignorance or malice isn't worth it. I'm Joel Chipkar. See you next time.
it was becoming pretty apparent that the hospital knew something was going on.
The virus stops with every vaccinated person.
In other words, you become a dead end to the virus.
Vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick.
I never knew that would be the last time I talked to my son.
They know at a very intimate level what's going on with this. They know all of it.
And yet, nobody's coming to the rescue of truth.
To public perception of the continued respect for the rule of law in Hong Kong.
In a stunning move, on the eve of the 20th anniversary of the handover of Hong Kong, the Chinese regime betrayed the pledge that Hong Kong's return was founded upon.
中英联合声明作为一个历史文件，已经不再具有任何现实意义。对中国中央政府对香港特区的管理也不具备任何约束力。英方对回归后的香港没有主权，没有治权，也没有监督权。
In 2019, under Beijing's urging, Hong Kong's chief executive tried to push a bill that would allow the extradition of Hong Kong residents and visitors to China.
Over the 22 years after reversion of sovereignty in 1997, there have been time and again many breaches of the basic law, but not as seriously as on this occasion when they tried to send us back to stand trial in the mainland.
This is a very important piece of legislation that will help to uphold justice.
It would allow for the extradition of basically anyone that Beijing doesn't like.
There, those extradited would be subject to the CCP's judicial system, which remains an instrument of control for the regime.
Massive Hong Kong protests broke into clashes with police Wednesday as riot officers let off rubber bullets and streams of tear gas.
Still Hong Kong, not China.
You can say that this is the last straw off the camel's back.
Either, given its size and economic influence, China's refusal to abide by many of its WTO commitments not only harms the U.S. and third country economic interests, but threatens to undermine the legitimacy of the WTO and the international rules-based trading system.
Thanks to the CCP's entry to the WTO, it now has a global chokehold on the manufacturing of medicines and medical supplies. In early March 2020, in the midst of the coronavirus crisis, China's state-run Xinhua news agency published an editorial targeting the U.S.
Is the Chinese regime preparing to blackmail the U.S. over pharmaceuticals? The Communist Party is hinting it could withhold face masks and medical supplies from the U.S. as a form of leverage on other issues. The coronavirus pandemic is highlighting America's deep dependence on China for medical supplies.
Since 2013, many countries have been enticed by the CCP's Belt Road Initiative, a global infrastructure development and investment strategy.
China has positioned itself as an advocate of globalization and says its policies help the developing world.
The aim of building the Belt and Road is to work together to face the risks and challenges facing mankind, realizing win-win cooperation and development together.
Over 60 countries in Asia, Europe, Africa, and South America have bought into this vision.
Even been charged with a crime. They've never had a trial. They've never had a lawyer. They don't know how long they'll be in prison. There is no prison sentence. They just disappeared into the Eritrean prison system. And now here we are 19 later. They're still there.
Now, you've met with Eritrean Christians, so tell us what they've told you about the persecution that they've been forced to endure.
You know, one of the amazing things is the faithfulness of our Eritrean brothers and sisters. And they say persecution is not sweet, but it is useful. God is using persecution in that country to purify and to build his church. And their ministry goes on. In fact, several years ago, there was a report that the Eritrean government had actually built a new prison, and they were putting all of the Christians in the same prison to keep them from evangelizing other prisoners in other prisons. So they saw this as a way of isolating the Christians, but instead it was bringing them together, allowing them to fellowship with each other. But that tells you that their ministry in prison was going on. They were still sharing the gospel in spite of being in prison.
Now, earlier they were kept in boxcars, railroad cars, also containers, and then also underground. Tell us about that.
Yeah, there are Eritrean Christians that have been kept for many months in metal shipping containers. Helen Berhane is probably one of the best known, an Eritrean worship leader and singer, kept in a metal shipping container. Other Christians have talked about being held in underground prison cells with no light, literally 24 hours a day in the pitch darkness. So these are very miserable prison conditions for these two brothers and for other Christians in prison in Eritrea.
Todd, I'm sure some people would say, well, how can...
Erupted around 8 last night. D.C. Metro Police say 4 of the victims are male. 1 is female. The acting chief says officers nearby heard the shots and responded. Now authorities ask people in the neighborhood to help them track down the shooters.
This is not a war zone. We want our residents to feel safe. And I'm asking you, listen, our officers are where they need to be. Our expectation is that the community will respond to us accordingly so that we can continue to keep your city safe.
Police say the mass shooting remains under investigation.
Metropolitan Police have not arrested a suspect in connection with the shooting, but the acting police chief asked for help collecting information on what she called a very disturbing shooting. An investigation is underway in Pierce County, Washington, after a suspect rammed a stolen car into a cannabis store on Friday and stole merchandise. This footage shows the officers' response to the scene on reports of burglary, but didn't find the suspects inside. Police asking for help with information leading to a suspect. The U.S. Coast Guard rescues a 25-year-old man adrift at sea, reported missing for 2 days. Family reported Charles Gregory missing after he didn't return to a boat ramp in St. Augustine, Florida. An air crew spotted Gregory sitting in a partially submerged 12-foot boat. Thankfully, no medical concerns reported as Gregory was taken to EMS. In Idaho, a school bus carrying around 30 campers rolls over, leaving 7 passengers critically injured. In Banks, the police say 7 people have critical injuries and 4 had non-critical injuries. The bus carrying campers 13 to 18 years old back to Boise from a YMCA summer camp. The flipped bus blocked a state highway that follows the Payette River, causing a massive traffic jam. The crash is being investigated as a one-vehicle collision. Taking a look over in Colorado Springs, a funnel cloud spun over the area Saturday during a tornado warning. The National Weather Service warning the area of possible severe thunderstorms, and in Pueblo, Colorado says 2, possibly 3 tornadoes touched down in northeast El Paso County. No damage, thankfully, to any property, just some trees missing a few branches and a crooked road sign. Taking a look at Alaska, where even though climate change is melting the Mendenhall Glacier, tourists continue to flock to it. The glacier is receding so quickly that by 2050 it might not be visible. Thousands of tourists visit Alaska's capital city to gawk at the glacier that gets swarmed by sightseers from cruise ships. A deal between the city and cruise industries will limit how many ships arrive next year. City leaders and major cruise lines agreed to a daily 5-ship limit for next year, but critics worry that it won't ease.
Racist. It is abusive. It discriminates against one's color.
At school board meetings, do you agree with this book that is being taught with kids that babies are racist? Congressional hearings and across the airwaves.
Does critical race theory conflict with the gospel?
Teaching slavery and critical race theory, those aren't the same things, are they?
It's become a source of controversy and confusion.
Don't nobody know what critical race theory means before a year and a half ago. They ain't critical, they ain't run a race, and they ain't got no theory.
Into a dwelling place of God.
Pastor and author Tony Evans believes it could also be part of God's divine plan.
He may have allowed this for the purpose of a wake-up call.
In the pulpit, and now a newly updated book, Evans is on a campaign to redeem the discourse around race, wading into the crosscurrents of CRT with the Bible and a real-world example of what he says the theory attempts to expose.
What does a golf course have to do with critical race theory? Well, on the surface, it might not be that obvious, but dive a little deeper into history, the connection becomes a little clearer.
Well, the golf course is buttressed against our church property.
After years of trying, Evans's church, Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship, bought the nearby Golf Club of Dallas in 2020. Now under renovation, the 155-acre, 18-hole course is open to all.
When we first moved to this community, the golf course, which comes up against the precipice of our church facilities, was segregated. African Americans were not allowed to play on it. The first African American that was allowed to play was in 1994.
As times changed, so did the country club's rules, which did not expressly deny blacks. Instead, a revised policy of referral by a current member and then approval by 2/3 of the entire club made membership elusive.
So even if somebody would have invited me, I couldn't become a member, even if that individual who invited me wasn't a racist, because the structure of how the golf course operated.
That, Evans explains, is what critical race theory initially was designed to address. Racism not on the personal level, but within systems. It puts the lens on laws that have changed for the good, while focusing on the legacy of unjust systems that evade the goal of equality. Today, the CRT framework has been attached to gender and other controversial issues, driving a wedge between parents and teachers, and even within the walls of the church. The SBC began losing prominent black pastors after the Southern Baptists proposed a resolution against CRT. Evans speaks harshly about the division.
Now here's the deal. If you're spending more time discussing CRT than you are KRT, that is this, then you've been tricked by the world.
Focusing on the bigger picture, he's calling on Christians to respond to their call of biblical unity, offering an alternative framework he's coined KRT.
KRT is a kingdom race theology. Rather than a theory, we wanted to deal with a theology because we wanted to talk about what God has to say.
Evans describes KRT as the visible, comprehensive rule of God over every area of life, which prioritizes race and racism as kingdom issues rather than societal or cultural problems. But it doesn't stop there. It also emphasizes the goal of reconciliation.
Reconciliation demands that we look toward where God wants us to go while not ignoring where we've come from. And that means we can teach honest history. We can teach some of the inequities that have gone on. Kids need to know about the pain of the past on either side of the tracks that you happen to be on. But we can't stop with that conversation because
for the Archdiocese of Denver. Among his roles, helping schools in the Archdiocese come up with security plans.
The important thing is collaboration, leveraging assets, partnering with local law enforcement, because we have parishes and churches and schools all across northern Colorado, and everybody is in their own different financial statuses, right? So you need to partner with your local law enforcement. You need to partner with local schools, whether they're public schools or not.
It's common sense steps like training and collaboration that experts believe provide schools the best chance at stopping an active shooter, since preventing them entirely is highly unlikely.
We're unique, right? What does America have that other countries don't have? Two things. One, a Second Amendment, and two, more guns than people. By most accounts, there's over 450 million guns for just over 300 million people.
Back in 2016, research from Johns Hopkins University found even the highest priced technology did nothing to help stop mass shootings. Researchers writing, quote, "There is no universal school safety solution. No one technology will solve all school safety and security issues. The sheer number of schools and school districts across the country, with different geography, funding, building construction and layout, demographics, and priorities, make each one different."
What does school safety look like in our country? It looks as bad as Uvalde and as good as Tennessee, and everything in the middle.
Former D.C. Homeland Security Chief Donnell Harvin says it's important that people keep talking about school security, even after the news cycle moves on.
Many people are apathetic and have given up. and many people are desensitized. And we can't allow that apathy and that kind of mindset to take hold of the fact that the next shooter is planning and there's kids in that classroom.
When it comes to school security, parents can also make a difference. The key is communication. Ask your child's school what they're doing, what they're not, and then don't stop asking until you get the right answer. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Denver.
We're all searching for answers.
I grew up on the Great Lakes. I sat on the shoreline looking up into the sky a lot. It opens your curiosity.
I have dealt with a lot of people, death and dying. I just knew that there was some power that is deeper than what we realize. That God is bigger than what we realize. We limit God because we're limited in our thinking.
I personally believe in a higher power. In my soul, I wanted to learn. I wanted to understand better why we're having all these problems in life. We're supposed to be a country of virtuous excellence, and yet we have so much strife, so much division, so much hate, so much unnecessary conflicts.
I subscribed to Epoch Times some time ago, and one's eye cannot help but fall on a title called How Humankind Came to Be.